is it too late to tell you that everything means nothing if I can't have you? I got this view, but I might as well be in a hotel room, yeah.
Hello and welcome to Tuesday Newsday number 27, where our learning goal is to determine two or more central ideas of a text and analyze their development over the course of that text, including how they interact and build on one another. At the end of today's lesson, you will be asked to rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 4. This means if you're at a 4, that means that you can identify the central idea or ideas and identify the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, and you're able to identify how the ideas build on one another. A 3 means that you can identify the central idea or ideas and the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point. A 2 means that you can identify the central idea, but you're not really getting to that evidence. You're not really pointing to that evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point. Not pointing to evidence is a lot like not showing your work in math. We want to see the process. The right answer comes as a byproduct of the process, and each of your classes forces you to show that you are critically thinking. Those critical thinking skills come out in the process. And I don't know if this is a news flash for you or if you knew this already, but school has never been about the right answer. The right answer is a byproduct of the process, but we are really here to teach you critical thinking and problem-solving skills. Pointing to the evidence does just that. A 1 means you are unsure of how to find the central idea, which again is okay. Ideally, everyone is at a 3 by the end of the year, but if you're at a 1, that means that I know that and can adjust my teaching accordingly. I want everyone to be at a 3 here by the end of the year. To receive a unit and a half for today's lesson, you must highlight or underline the main idea, circle the evidence that the author uses to prove his or her point, and put a box around any other central ideas in the text. We will be working specifically with 4 different skills listed here. The first skill we're working on is identifying the topic. Remember that the topic is not the main idea. The topic is an indication of what the main idea will be, but the main idea comes out in the details. All we get in the headline is a quick sort of flash of what the main idea will be. Summarizing the story is the next skill that we'll be working on. I'm going to ask you to identify or summarize the story in 2 different ways. If you accomplish this task, you will earn an extra unit. I want you to identify or summarize the story, in 12 words exactly, and then summarize the story again in 32 words. This variation in length allows you to, challenges you to think about the story in a different way, add more detail, just be more thorough in one way and more concise in the other. What are the first and last sentence? Typically the first sentence serves to introduce the main idea and the last sentence serves to recap that main idea. Next, you will identify what you think the main idea is. Again, this is a bit of a shift from probably the first 20 to 24 Tuesday Newsdays that we had. Typically, I had this as the last question. I moved it up to the third one. And the reason why is because I wanted to talk about repeated ideas later on and kind of adjust that anyway. I want you to respond to the quote. I pulled 2 quotes from the story, and I want you to identify how those quotes add to the story. 1, how does this quote support the main idea? And then the second quote, why was this quote even included in the story? What is the reason that the author got those quotes? Once you've done that, you've earned a unit and a half for today, along with, of course, the vocab listed here, which we will see throughout the story. Again, in order, so you don't have to worry about that. You'll see them as they show up. Today's story is titled, What's a Sporting Event Look Like in an Empty Stadium? Written for the Washington Post on the 15th of March. Now, there's a quick disclaimer here. As of March 14th, before we could run this story, the NBA suspended all games, as did the NHL. Other leagues quickly followed suit, including Major League Soccer and the PGA Tour. Baseball's opening day has been postponed. The NCAA basketball tournaments for both women and men have been canceled. So this was the plan before all of these sports were just straight up canceled. We were going to be watching sports on television in an empty stadium. So the article begins this way. It was baseball as played in a sensory deprivation tank. No smell of hot dogs or popcorn. A silence so pure you could hear the bullpen phone ringing from the dugout. Nothing but empty green seats as far as the eye could see. It was still baseball, but a grotesque, distorted version that no one who was there at Oriole Park at Camden Yards in Baltimore on April 29, 2015 ever wanted to witness again. Fans play such a big part in generating the intensity when you're playing at home, said Jim Palmer, a Hall of Fame pitcher who had a 19-year career with the Orioles, and now a television broadcaster who was in the booth that day when civil unrest in Baltimore following the death of Freddie Gray forced the team to play a home game against the Chicago White Sox with no fans present. All of that was gone. The question of whether a sporting event is still a sporting event if played without fans is suddenly and unsettlingly pertinent again this week, as the majority of North American leagues, including the National Basketball Association, the National Hockey League, and Major League Baseball, prepare contingency plans for the growing coronavirus outbreak. It is a step that has been already taken in Europe, where top-level soccer matches in Spain, Portugal, France, Germany, and Slovakia have been or will be played in empty stadiums, and Italy, among the countries hardest hit by coronavirus, has canceled all matches for the next month. In Asia, Japan's Nippon Professional Baseball League and South Korea's baseball organization, the KBO, have pushed back the starts of their regular seasons indefinitely. American teams could be deciding soon whether to postpone or relocate games or play them without fans. Chief among them are the NHL's San Jose Sharks, who play in Santa Clara County in California, where public health officials, citing an increase in coronavirus cases and the dangers of community spread, have banned public gatherings of more than 1,000 people for 3 weeks. The county-wide ban could affect 3 Sharks home games, as well as the National Collegiate Athletic Association women's basketball tournament games at Stanford, and 1 home game of the Major League Soccer San Jose Earthquakes. Both the NHL and the NBA are in the final weeks of their regular seasons, with playoffs set to begin in April, adding a complicating factor to decisions about how to proceed in the event the outbreak gets worse. The NBA circulated a memo the week of March 9th instructing teams to prepare for the possibility of games in empty arenas, a notion that initially did not appear to sit well with one star player. "I play for the fans. That's what it's all about," LeBron James said. "If I show up to the arena and there ain't no fans there, I ain't playing." James walked back his comments on March 10th. "It's funny because when I was asked the question, would you play with no fans, I had no idea there was actually a conversation going on behind closed doors about that particular virus," James said. "Obviously, I would be very disappointed, not having the fans, because that's what I play for. I play for my family, I play for my fans." They're saying no one could actually come to the game if they go to that point. So I'd be disappointed in that. But at the same time, you got to listen to the people that are keeping track of what's going on. If they feel that it's best for the safety of the players, safety of the franchise, safety of the league to mandate that, then we'll all listen to it. MLB, if only because its opening day is still more than 2 weeks away, is in a somewhat better spot, though league officials informed teams on a conference call the night of March 9th to begin contingency preparations for the possibility of the outbreak spreading. Baseball is also used to having individual teams' schedules upended by weather, with Florida and Texas-based teams occasionally having games moved to other locations. A league representative said March 10th that no decision had been made on altering the schedule for coronavirus, but that the MLB would be moving forward on a team-by-team basis. In other words, the Seattle Mariners, whose home city, Seattle, Washington, is among the hardest hit in the U.S., could require more urgent action than a team further from an outbreak. At this point, MLB is more likely to move games to spring training facilities in Arizona and Florida or minor league stadiums away from major outbreaks than to play them in empty stadiums. For U.S. sports, the current situation is perhaps most reminiscent of the fall of 2001 in the aftermath of 9/11, when the National Football League postponed week 2 of its regular season, moving those games to the end of its schedule, and MLB took a 6-day pause before resuming the final month of its regular season, with World Series games pushed into November for the first time. The notion of games played in empty stadiums or arenas, however, goes against the very nature of sports as entertainment. If it becomes impossible, for example, to bring massive crowds to the Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival, they would postpone or cancel the event, rather than have the bands play in an empty California desert. It would be awful, Washington Nationals first baseman Ryan Zimmerman, speaking before a spring training game in West Palm Beach, Florida, said about the possibility of playing in empty stadiums. We're entertainers. That's what we get paid to do. We enjoy playing in front of fans, playing in an empty stadium. It's hard enough to play spring training games in front of 2, 3, 4, 5,000 people, he continued. That's why it's so hard to play down here. You know the games don't count, and there's no atmosphere. So having to play games that don't count in no atmosphere, I think the product would be tough. We're all professionals, and I'm sure we would do it, but I don't think it would be good. Staging games without fans also goes against the concurrent nature of sports as massive business. Although television revenue has long since passed ticket sales as the top revenue driver of professional sports, teams and leagues stand to lose untold millions of dollars with each gate that is lost. That helps explain why, to this day, the April 29, 2015 game between the White Sox and Orioles in Baltimore remains the only game in North American professional sports to have been played with no fans in attendance. The decision came 4 days after Camden Yards was briefly placed on lockdown because of public safety concerns near the end of an Orioles-Boston Red Sox game, when protests just outside the stadium became violent. In the aftermath, the first 2 games of a scheduled 3-game series between the Orioles and the White Sox were postponed until the following month, but the MLB needed the 3rd game to be played. A subsequent 3-game home series against Tampa Bay was moved to Florida. Since bringing tens of thousands of fans to Camden Yards in such an atmosphere would have required dozens of police officers who were needed elsewhere in the city, the league made the decision, late in the afternoon the day before, to stage the game without fans, and because the city had implemented a 10 p.m. curfew, the game was moved to the afternoon. That left the Orioles with less than 24 hours to prepare. Though team officials and stadium personnel tried to keep everything as normal as possible, from batting practice to the exchange of lineup cards to the playing of the national anthem, when White Sox leadoff man Adam Eaton stepped into the batter's box to face Orioles right-hander Ubaldo Jimenez, nothing about it felt normal. I underestimated how jarring it would be, Eaton, now the Washington Nationals right fielder, told the Baltimore Sun. When it first got into it, I didn't think it would be that big of a deal. There was almost this half asleep feel because there was no energy. There were no people there. As baseball players, as teams, we feed off energy, and when there's nothing there, it's a very surreal and weird feeling that I'll never forget, but I kind of wish I could. The Orioles pumped music over the loudspeakers between innings, and the public address announcer recited the names of each batter before he stepped into the box, if only to maintain the normal rhythm of games. But otherwise, the stadium was free of manufactured sounds. No trumpet called charge, no scoreboard exhortations to make some noise. It was surreal, Palmer said. People later told me that they could hear my voice in the dugout. Normally we have to talk over the crowd. It's in our headphones. But that day you could hear everything. Orioles first baseman Chris Davis hit a 3-run homer in the first inning, the decisive blow in the Orioles 8-2 victory, played in a crisp 2 hours, 3 minutes. Alright, so here we are back at the worksheet. I have taken care of some of the stuff that is just copy-pasting. So, identifying the topic, this is straight from the title. What's a sporting event look like in an empty stadium? Your task will be to summarize the story in 12 words, and then summarize the story in 32 words. And I have identified the first and last sentence. Your job will be to identify the main idea of the article now. And then let's take a look at the response to the quote section. So this was Ryan Zimmerman who said, and he was talking of spring training when he said, that's why it's so hard to play down here, because they go south where the weather's warmer, they can start the season a little bit earlier. You know the games don't count and there is no atmosphere. So having to play games that don't count and no atmosphere, I think the product would be tough. We're all professionals, and I'm sure we would do it, but I don't think it would be good. How does this quote support the main idea that you suggested just before this? The second quote says, "This is from the pitcher who pitched in the that game in 2015 where there were no fans. He said it was surreal. People later told me they could hear my voice in the dugout. Normally we have to talk over the crowd. It's in our headphones. But that day you could hear everything." Why is this quote included in the story? Once you have completed that, I think that is all I have for you. And so, ciao for now. All right, let's take a look at the main idea. If you wrote something similar to this, you are on the right track. That it would be hard for them to play in front of empty stadiums. While they're pros, they feed off the energy of the fans. Both the baseball and basketball players quoted in the story state this. The quote here, this quote is valuable because it draws on experience. The player is able to say what it would be like because it would be similar to what they do during spring training games. And then why was this quote included? To illustrate how different it would be to play in front of an empty stadium, because this person has experience with that. So kind of just to further the point of that the author is making. Those are the evidence pieces that help the author develop the main idea. That's the evidence that we like to see. If you can explain why that's there, that tells me that you get evidence. All right, and let's go over and take a look at our scale, and you can tell me where you stand based on, or your ability to determine central idea. Here's that scale: a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1. Where would you rate yourself?